Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic. Don't forget to subscribe. But today, I want to take you on a step-by-step walkthrough on how disinformation or misinformation spreads. Now, if you are listening to this on the radio or you're listening to this in SoundCloud, I highly recommend you go and actually watch the YouTube video on this because this is a slideshow presentation about how this actually works with evidence and all of that. And so with that, we are going to be talking about the USAID Politico Pro, basically disinformation or misinformation spread. This is actually recently in the news as of about 5 days ago or so. And by virtue of that, it's still fresh in our minds. But I want to basically explain how this gets absolutely everywhere, how this explodes, and quite frankly, how people don't get the memo when it's actually clarified. And so, with that, let's dive in. And as always, we're going to start with the ground rules here. First things first, this is not political. I do not care what side of the political spectrum you're on. I have a saying, I've said it a million times here, that cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. We see misinformation and disinformation coming from all sides of the political spectrum. So if this was a President Harris and her side basically had this issue, I would be saying basically the same things and doing the same video. I have to clarify these things because I always get hate mail when I do them, but it's important to know we are sticking with the facts. Now, in that vein, these are the facts as of Monday, February 10th, 4 p.m. Central Time. I'm in Chicago, so I'm in Central. So if anything else comes out after this, here we go. But at this point, we are 5 days past this event. We know the facts on the ground. Unfortunately, not everybody does. And so with that, various sources were used for this. I have actual screenshots that I have personally taken and all of that. The New York Times actually had a really good write-up on this, but I've used several different sources for this, and you will see some of these sources essentially in place here, not to mention the actual screenshots of how this exploded on X/Twitter. And here we go. And remember, I think it's important to note that all governments have some kind of mismanaged, and it's important to have the actual facts. Now, you may be a huge fan of what President Trump is doing in terms of letting Doge basically shut down things like USAID, find corruption, all of that kind of stuff, or you might hate it. Again, for the record, I don't care how good or bad the government is, there are going to be things like fraud. There is going to be mismanagement. By virtue of that, overwhelmingly, the government may do good things, but it's also important to have fact checkers. It's important to have gatekeepers and all of that and transparency to basically root that out. So, again, whether you love it or hate it, I think we can all agree that we don't want fraud or mismanagement in the government. And so, with that, let's dive into this situation because, as we know, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, essentially went through and started releasing a whole bunch of data. But we'll get to that, interestingly enough, because do they really have to do that for us to know about this? And the answer is no, but we'll talk about that as well. So here's how this essentially started. On February 5th, 7:50 a.m. Central Time, and again, all screenshots you see are mine. Kyle Becker, who basically considers himself an independent journalist, he has a right-wing bias on that. Again, you're going to find biases in independent journalists, if that's what they're called, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, if you go look at his Twitter feed or his X feed, it is clearly a right-wing bias. Again, I'm not adjudicating that. He's perfectly fine having a right wing bias if he wants, but this is what he posted, and this is his actual post that kicked this off, essentially saying, and I quote, "Fun fact, at Politico received US aid funds. Everything makes sense now." And the screenshots he has shows Political LLC, and then underneath that, for those of you that are just listening, it shows total awarded amount $8.1 million. Now, if you're reading this and you're looking at this, basically here's Politico being awarded $8.1 million. In other words, USAID is paying Politico over $8 million. This is what started it at 7:50 a.m. Central on February 5th. And with that, it started to expand because as people obviously, and this is the virality of social media, started picking up this news, as things go viral, they go viral basically by people that have a ton of followers that spread this information. And that would be 28 minutes later. Basically, the known right-wing pundit Charlie Kirk essentially took Mr. Becker's initial post, and then shared it saying, so let me get this straight. USAID has been spending millions of taxpayer dollars every year funding not only the BBC, but also Politico. And here we go. This is where it starts to really expand in views. Charlie Kirk is very heavily followed on the right, and by virtue of that, he has just put out there that USAID is spending millions of dollars on Politico, the publication worldwide that talks about politics on various governments, not just here in the United States, but elsewhere as well. And so by virtue of that, it starts to climb because from there, it's essentially picked up by Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, or MTG, who also has a very vast following on the right and essentially spreads it. And basically, her headline, I won't read her whole thing, but USAID sent millions to Politico in all caps and all of that. And obviously, here we go. It starts to climb. It starts to expand from Charlie Kirk, who is a very well-known pundit, to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a very, very well-known congresswoman, and it keeps growing and growing. And by virtue of that, it now gets picked up worldwide as everybody in whatever political ecosystem they're in follows all the big pundits, from the left if you're on the left, or the right if you're on the right, and some people follow everybody. Here we go. So with that, basically the autocrat that runs Hungary, Viktor Orban, basically picks this up and then accuses USAID of essentially financing disinformation campaigns within his country. And I quote Mr. Orban, so apparently USAID financed ultra-progressive Politico in Brussels and basically the entire left-wing media in Hungary under the previous US administration, and they call me disruptor of the year. Obviously, he goes on to thank President Trump for essentially getting this information out to the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so by virtue of that, now it goes global and it absolutely explodes. And we will talk about that explosion. And so by virtue of that, now we are spinning this up. And remember, we are only basically 5 hours and 22 minutes after that first initial post that launched all of this, spread it around the world, including literal leaders of other countries. And so by virtue of it, it keeps growing. Now, as it expands across the world, it continues to expand in the United States because basically 11 minutes after Mr. Orban in Hungary posts this, another very heavily followed right-wing pundit, Benny Johnson, in the United States, expands it and says, and I quote, "World leaders are now celebrating the abolishment of, the abolition of fake news funded by USAID. The dam has broken." And so again, we take that initial screenshot from Kyle Becker, basically 5 hours and 33 minutes previous to Mr. Johnson's expansion, where he puts out that Politico was basically receiving $8.1 million from USAID, and it goes viral around the world, and it keeps expanding. And you can see, as of the screenshots, Mr. Johnson has 135,000 views pretty much in the first couple of days. Orban has millions. Marjorie Taylor Greene has a ton, et cetera, et cetera. And so by virtue of it, it keeps going. But here's the thing. On that day, 11 hours and 40 minutes later, Kyle Becker, the one who started all of this, put out a tweet, not apologizing or anything like that, but CNN, in the meantime, had basically called him out and said, no, USAID is not sending $8.1 million to Politico. Here's the actual breakdown. And Kyle Becker basically puts that out. And I quote, political funding per U.S. government spending website, basically U.S. government 8.4 million, but the USAID line under State Department is $24,000. That's essentially what they're doing. They are buying Political Pro subscriptions for $24,000, or roughly $8,000 a subscription. And so by virtue of that, the damage is done. And the reason why is not too many people are going to get this memo. They're not reading Kyle. They're not reading Mr. Becker. They're reading Viktor Orban. They're reading Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're reading Benny Johnson and Charlie Kirk. These are the people that have the most followers. These are the people that essentially are spreading this and making it completely viral. And so how many people are going to see that original post? Only if all the people I just mentioned tweet it out again or repost it again. And so by virtue of that, AudiSense, if you will, AudiSense, the outfit, basically put out this in the New York Times, but you can actually see how this charts. You can see Kyle Becker, as they call an independent journalist, goes viral, et cetera, et cetera. Charlie Kirk picks it up, it grows, expands, and you can see as it moves more up and more to the right, there are more views, up to 80 million views when this was put out a couple of days ago, basically by February 6th, 10 p.m. Eastern time. And so you are talking about essentially a day, day and a half to go to 80 million views on what is demonstrably false. This is how misinformation and disinformation spreads. And so by virtue of that, let's talk about this and break this down. So first things first, I can't say if Mr. Becker intentionally meant to deceive anybody. Despite his known bias, and again, he's on the right, and that's perfectly fine as people are on the left, et cetera, et cetera. He may have created this in earnest, misunderstanding the data, looking at it thinking, oh my God, they're spending 8.8, USAID is spending $8.1 million on this. I want to put this out there because this is absolutely horrific and corrupt. And if that were true, he very well could be. Or maybe he knew he was wrong, but really trying to dig the knife. I don't know. I can't adjudicate that. The facts are on the ground, are basically what we are talking about here, because without context on that initial post, he does make it seem like USAID is spending over $8 million on Politico Pro. And again, look at his original tweet that I put up on the screen a few slides ago. Note the language and note the images. He literally says Politico received USAID funds and it's to the tune of 8.1 million. His screenshots, his language, all of that screams that this is happening. Now, again, Mr. Becker could have misunderstood and simply said, yeah, to him, he believes 8.1 million is being spent on Politico. Or maybe he knew the breakdowns and said, screw it. I don't know. And I can't adjudicate him for that. Nobody truly can except for him, because I have no other evidence to the contrary on that regarding this specific situation. So it's important to understand that, but you'll note why language and images are important. The more clarity we have on a situation, the more accurate the information is going to be. And a generic, 10 words, and an image is not going to give us that. And that's important to remember as you're posting things. Make sure you are clear, just as I am trying to be clear here and everything I do. And I don't always make it. I fall down too, right? We all do, but we should strive for that. Now, on top of this, Politico Pro, for the record, and Politico came out with their own statement saying, no, we are not getting $8 million. They're buying Politico Pro. This isn't some odd funding thing. Anybody can buy Politico Pro. You can go buy it. It's $8,000 to $10,000 a license, and it is for advanced political reporting. So if you think about it like a Bloomberg terminal that the finance people would purchase that give them advanced analytics and data on stocks and all that kind of stuff, or Westlaw, legal people buy Westlaw terminals to get access to instant information, so that they can basically use this in their cases and all of that. Politico Pro and USAID make a lot of sense. USAID works around the globe, and oftentimes they are working in areas that have governments that could be oppressive. And so a Politico Pro is giving them trending and analysis and a whole bunch of inside information that you and I are not going to get if we're spending $50 a year on a Politico subscription to read whatever they're putting out on the web. That's what we get. They get something a lot deeper. And when you've got literal Americans working in places like South Sudan that have issues with terrorism, this is the kind of information that you're going to want to need. This cost is absolutely justified to ensure the safety and security of American workers in what are, in some cases, literal war zones. And so by virtue of that, this is not a typical subscription. This is an advanced subscription that gives you insight and therefore safety for the people on the ground. And so this is not some crazy funding thing. Again, you right now can go and buy it if you want to spend $8,000 to $10,000 a year on Politico. And you'll get a way more interesting data set than we would ever read just going to their website, politico.com. So it's important to note that. On top of it, as I've said, this just really underscores how easy misinformation and disinformation is to spread, and that nobody gets the memo. Kyle Becker does not have nearly as many followers as a Viktor Orban, and by virtue of that, when he puts that out, And he's not saying that this is a correction or a clarification. He's just giving a further breakdown that clarifies. So if you're not catching everything, and for the record, these people, I had to go scrolling and scrolling and scrolling to find this information. Every screenshot of tweets that you just saw are screenshots I actually took. These people tweet constantly. Like, I don't know. Do you have another job? Like, it just feels like it's just constant, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of tweets a day in some cases. And so by virtue of that, if you are constantly trying to keep up and you are even a follower of Kyle Becker, not to mention anybody that spread it, this would get buried. It really would, unless you were paying attention and absorbing all of this information almost in real time. So it's very easy to spread. Nobody gets the memo, and by virtue of that, we are still seeing this as pervasive. And there have been other accounting or government agencies that have been taken into account, for spending in USAID. So it's not there on top, but the point is you still see people piping up and be like, well, yeah, they're funding, left-wing bias to the tune of $8 million a year around the globe through Politico, and the answer is no. That's not what is happening here. And so this is the problem that we have with disinformation. And this, quite frankly, is a minor issue. There is much more serious and damaging disinformation that is coming, basically from intelligence agencies around the world and all this other stuff. But this is a minor one, which I thought would be interesting to do because everybody was talking about it, but quite frankly, it's just we're not getting the memo. It's a huge thing. And so we can see even 5 days later, as I'm sitting here recording this, it's still there and it's still going. And I promise you, somebody's going to remember this 3 years from now and use it in an argument, and they're going to be wrong. I mean, that's just how that works. And so this really, I think, underscores the need for the editorial process. I've had people tell me, well, real information, that fire hose of just real-time info left and right is where it's at. The editorial process slows everything down. And yeah, it does, but it also ensures accuracy. And the example I always use is look at the hurricanes we had in 2024 that hit Asheville, North Carolina. There was a fire hose of just demonstrably false information coming out of bodies floating down rivers, and FEMA didn't do anything when the actual mayor of Asheville and other towns came out and said FEMA has been on it. There's no body of rivers, little girls, basically holding puppies, in the middle of a storm, all fake, that was taken and exploded in real time because there wasn't an editorial process. The problem with the editorial process is it corrects disinformation and misinformation. But again, if you're not getting the memo, or you're basically getting information in real time that is demonstrably false and not getting these corrections, we continue to have a growing and pervasive issue. We need an editorial process. And quite frankly, we need to educate everybody as to why the editorial process is so unbelievably important. This underscores all of that. All of that. And again, this isn't political, excuse me. I have said this time immemorial. This is just the facts. This is just the standard of how we ingest information. Doesn't matter about political bias. It's all about getting accurate information. And by virtue of that, the kicker to the whole thing is that none of this is actually news. None of this stuff about USAID spending, all that kind of stuff, is essentially news. Essentially, in 2006, President George W. Bush signed a congressional act into law that made essentially spending in the government transparent. And so they put up usaspending.gov. It has been up for something like 15 to 20 years at this point, where you can literally go drill down and see how the government is spending this. This is not some crazy revelation that is coming out of nowhere. It's like people are just discovering this exists when it has existed since well beyond this super deep political divide. And so by virtue of that, go to usaspending.gov yourself and take a look at it. You can use the Internet Archive. I just literally did a segment on why we need to protect it, and you can go see past iterations and compare it for yourself. This isn't revelation, but it is now. And it's turning into misinformation and disinformation, and that absolutely sucks. So make sure you are educated. Make sure you are filtering that information. And if basically you are seeing something, follow up on that if you believe it deeply, and make sure it's actually real. Because quite frankly, there's a lot of us out there that just want the truth. We just want the facts. And quite frankly, we want all of you to join us. And with that, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at Nick AESP. You can also follow me on YouTube as well, where I hope you subscribe. I'm also on Mastodon and now Blue Sky. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private and incredibly and accurately informed. Take care, everybody.